You're starting to I can't believe you just said that. I don't know, right?
I feel like it was shocking.
Wow. There's a whole year.
We're going to go ahead and get started. Okay. All right, let's get started. So it's my honor to introduce my good friend and co-resident, Dr. William Kane. Will hails from the Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. He received his undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan, go Blue, where he majored in business administration while also completing his pre-medical course requirements. He then went on to medical school at Wayne State University in Detroit. And here he developed a passion for general surgery and ultimately matched here at the University of Virginia for general surgery residency. Throughout his time at UVA, Will has been incredibly successful and productive. In addition to his exemplary clinical work, he completed a master's in clinical research and has authored over 30 peer-reviewed publications. Outside of the hospital, Will is an avid runner, having completed multiple marathons. He enjoys spending time with co-residents, his fiancée Sarah, and their dog and cat. Next year, he's going to be moving north for colorectal surgery fellowship at the University of Minnesota. Please join me in welcoming Will Kane as he gives his talk entitled Publishing with Purpose Towards a Sustainable Future of Academic Publishing.
Thank you, Nathan, for the kind introduction, and to all of you for the opportunity to speak today. This topic of academic publishing is one I've become more and more interested in as I've gone through residency, and I'm excited to share some of the things I've learned. I have no financial disclosures related to this talk, and while I'm by no means an expert on this topic, I have spoken to some during the course of my research. My understanding of the academic publishing industry has also been shaped by publishing articles of my own, as well as serving as a peer reviewer for several journals, including TCR, JACS, and Global Surgical Education. I have several objectives for today. The first is to acknowledge the historical context of the academic publishing industry, which greatly contributes to our current model of academic publishing. The second is to recognize some of the problems with the present system and how open access and other efforts might serve to address these problems. And the third is to make everyone aware of upcoming changes in the industry, including open access publishing requirements mandated by the White House. To do this, we will start with the origins of academic publishing and work toward present day. We'll review the institutionalization, commercialization, and eventual digitalization of the industry. We'll then spend some time analyzing the current paradigm with a focus on open access and peer review. Finally, we'll look to the future, discussing some publishing ideals and upcoming changes. So, to start, the historical context. The origins of academic publishing date back to the 17th century. At that time, the predominant model by which scientists communicated new information to each other was by mailing each other letters. This was obviously problematic as there was no accepted means for widespread communication, and it frequently resulted in scientists duplicating each other's work. One famous example of this was the invention of calculus. A mathematician named Gottfried Leibniz published his work, however, was later accused of plagiarizing Isaac Newton's unpublished ideas. This dispute was apparently quite the news of the day, with most of the public choosing to support one mathematician over the other. This system changed in 1665 when the first two academic journals were started. The first, the Journal of Savants, was begun by Denis de Salo of France. The other, started shortly thereafter, was Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society of London, which still exists today. Over the next century, other learned societies began starting journals of their own as well. By the 19th century, more specialized journals arose, the Journal of Medicine and the Lancet. University presses also came to be, including Johns Hopkins University Press, the longest-running university press in the US. The production and expansion of these journals was further powered by the invention of the steam-powered printing press. Scientific societies and university presses continued to be the dominant source of academic publishing into the early 1900s. However, after World War II and the invention of the atomic bomb, the US government, like many other nations, significantly increased its funding of scientific research. This resulted in a sharp uptick in the production of research works and ultimately led to the partnership of scientific societies with commercial publishers. The story of the rapid rise in commercial publishing during the second half of the 20th century cannot be told without mention of Robert Maxwell, the founder of Pergamon Press. During his tenure at Pergamon, Maxwell made several important observations that would change the academic publishing industry forever. First, he realized that starting new journals had a negligible impact on existing journals, as there was always seemingly more researchers looking to publish their work. He also recognized that copyright protections allowed each journal to serve as essentially its own monopoly, as no one journal could duplicate the works of another. As such, Pergamon Press grew from 59 journals in 1960 to 418 by 1992. Maxwell achieved this growth by attending academic conferences and offering to publish any work scientists were presenting, while simultaneously asking those scientists to serve as editors for his Pergamon journals. He also gave his journals impressive-sounding titles that are still around today. The International Journal of Blank was one of his favorites. He ultimately sold Pergamon Press in 1991 to what at the time was a smaller Dutch publisher called Elsevier. By the end of the 20th century, the scientific publishing industry seemed doomed. The digital era and the rise of the internet threatened the business model that relied on printing and distribution. However, Elsevier and other publishers worked to develop a creative solution that lasts to this day. Dubbed the Big Deal, publishers offered to bundle online subscriptions for hundreds of their journals and sell these packages to universities and libraries. These deals gave subscribers access to not only the most recent literature, but also their entire archive. Virtually overnight, Elsevier turned the academic publishing industry into an oligopoly. This takes us to the current model of academic publishing. Today, these 5 publishers, many of which I'm sure you all recognize, control more than 50% of the academic publishing market, and they continue to thrive. The number of academic papers published each year continues to steadily rise, and there are currently more than 5 million articles published each year. Similarly, the number of academic journals has consistently increased each year, with over 46,000 journals available worldwide in 2020. Now, I'm sure most people in this room are familiar with the academic publishing process, but to briefly review. Authors submit their work to a journal, which after a screening process, usually by editors, is sent out for peer review. A decision on whether to accept, reject, or request revisions is then produced through the peer review process, which is then returned to authors. Once an article is ultimately accepted, often after several rounds of peer review, the article is copy edited and eventually published. It's important to recognize that this process has remained largely unchanged for decades. The only real recent change is that correspondence takes place almost exclusively online nowadays. The economic paradigm of this process is also worth review, as it has been increasingly criticized by authors, libraries, and research funding agencies. Taxpayer-supported agencies and other institutions provide funding to researchers and universities, who then produce scientific work. The manuscripts resulting from this work are then either given to publishers for free, or the researchers themselves pay a fee to have their work published. University libraries also then pay publishers to access the work of those researchers. Furthermore, researchers also often volunteer their time as peer reviewers, sometimes editors, for publishers. In return, publishers polish, distribute, and archive these works digitally or in print. Government agencies are motivated to provide funding for this entire process in order to advance scientific progress. Universities and researchers are similarly motivated, with the added knowledge that publication of high-impact research is necessary to receive additional funding and is a cornerstone for career advancement. Publishers have a unique financial position in this ecosystem. They are essentially given a nearly finished product for free and then sell it back to the group of people who gave it to them. Deutsche Bank described this setup as a triple payment system, where the government finances the research, pays the salaries of those who carry out quality control, and finally end up buying the published product. To quote Stephen Baroni, a journalist at The Guardian, "It is as if the New Yorker or The Economist demanded that journalists write and edit each other's work for free and asked the government to foot the bill." This financial arrangement has allowed publishers to achieve some of the highest profit margins in all of business. In 2022, for example, Elsevier's parent company posted revenues of 3.3 billion euros and profits of 1.2 billion euros. This equates to a profit margin of 38%, higher than Apple, Google, Amazon, or Meta in 2022. This is also roughly 3 times higher than a traditional magazine publisher, whose profit margins usually hover around 12 to 15%. These profit margins have also put an increasing strain on the market. Combined with shrinking budgets, universities, libraries, and researchers have been feeling the impact of rising journal subscription costs for years, and for some, it has led to a breaking point. In 2019, the University of California, after paying $11 million a year in subscription fees, terminated their agreement with Elsevier. These fees for many institutions have simply become unsustainable. Here at UVA, our library has also been feeling the effects of journal price inflation. In 2018, UVA Library paid Elsevier over $1.8 million for its subscription to 3,354 Elsevier journals. That same year, UVA paid Springer Nature $670,000 for nearly 4,000 journals, of which 1,400 no one accessed even once. Currently, 85% of UVA's library collections budget goes toward journal subscriptions, of which just 5 publishers, Elsevier, Wiley, Springer Nature, Sage, and Wolters Kluwer, comprise 92% of the journal budget. However, changes to this paradigm are in process, and this leads to the topic of open access. In 2021, nearly 3 years after negotiations initially ended, the University of California and Elsevier were able to agree on a new type of deal dubbed a transformative open access agreement. Central to this contract was that any article published by University of California staff in an Elsevier journal would be immediately available and free to read by anyone. As of 2022, the University of California has secured 15 such transformative agreements, resulting in about half of the articles their faculty publish qualifying for open access. Furthermore, these agreements have overall become cost-saving for the university. Despite this fairly radical shift by the University of California and many other libraries, the concept of immediate and freely available publication of scientific research is not new. It dates back as far as the 1970s, when computer scientists and physicists began archiving and emailing each other preprints of their work, a practice that eventually led to the creation of the preprint server archive.org in 1991. The popularity of sites like archive.org led to one of the greatest publishing ideas that never was. In 1999, Harold Varmus, the director of the NIH at the time, proposed the establishment of eBiomed, a website dedicated to the free access of all biomedical research. Papers submitted to eBiomed would either be published immediately as a preprint or go through the traditional peer review process. Most importantly, authors would retain the copyright of their work. Dr. Varmus imagined a digital location where continuous conversation about in-process and published works could take place. However, after aggressive lobbying against the proposal by commercial publishers and some scientific societies, the NIH released a revised version of the proposal that looked much different. The new proposal stated that the site would only allow peer-reviewed papers submitted by publishers. Publishers would also hold the copyright of the work, and they would be allowed to keep papers behind paywalls for up to 1 year after publication. The revised proposal ultimately became what is now PubMed Central. Dr. Varmus and others, disappointed by the drastic changes to their eBiomed proposal, later went on to found a nonprofit open access publisher called Public Library of Science, now known as PLOS, in 2001. The founders stated, quote, "If we really want to change the publication of scientific research, we must do the publishing ourselves." PLOS and other open access journals operate under the idea that authors can pay upfront fees to have their work become freely and immediately available for readers and without restriction on reuse. This model allows for greater dissemination of scientific work compared to the traditional subscription-based or paywalled model. Over the past 2 decades, open access publishing has increased in popularity and open access journals have rapidly expanded. Today, open access can take many forms. Compared to paywalled journals like JAMA, for example, gold open access journals like JAMA Network Open allow authors to retain copyright and make their work immediately and freely available. However, they charge an article processing fee to authors. Not shown in this diagram are also hybrid journals, which operate primarily under a paywalled subscription model, but also offer an open access option which carries the article processing charge. Additionally, green open access repositories like PubMed Central store peer-reviewed works at no cost to authors or readers. However, publishers own the copyright to the work. Because of this, most academics consider Diamond open access to be the optimal method for dissemination of research. Diamond OA journals, including those published by UVA's own Aperio Press, are peer-reviewed, free for authors and readers, and allow authors to retain the copyright of their work. Really, the only difference between Diamond OA and preprint servers is that Diamond OA papers are peer-reviewed. Proponents of open access publishing cite the increased visibility, supported by evidence demonstrating that OA articles are viewed and downloaded more. There's also some evidence that OA articles may be cited more than paywalled articles. Finally, there is an equity argument to open access. Making an article free for anyone to read allows those without sufficient funding greater access to published research, particularly those in developing countries. The push for greater OA publishing has been championed by a number of organizations, most notably Coalition S, who in 2018 launched Plan S, which stands for SHOCK. The proposal required that by 2021, all publications that were supported by Coalition S funding bodies, which includes organizations like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, must be made freely and immediately available at the time of publication. For researchers supported by these funders, this change effectively eliminated the 12-month open access embargo enforced by many journals. This initiative has had a profound impact on the availability of open access publishing and forced many journals, including high-profile journals like Nature, to introduce an OA publishing option for authors. The major criticism of this proposal was that it allowed researchers to still publish in hybrid journals, where publishers can charge an article processing fee for the article to be published open access, while simultaneously charging readers subscription fees for the journal, allowing publishers to sort of double dip in revenue. Just a few months ago, Coalition S introduced an even bolder, updated proposal. In it, the group offers 5 principles for the sustainable publishing of research. Number 1, authors should be responsible for the dissemination of their findings. Number 2, all publications should be shared immediately and openly without barriers or cost. Number 3, quality control processes, such as peer review, should be community-based and open to ensure trustworthiness of research findings. Number 4, all publications should be eligible for assessment of the quality of their work and should not have to rely on proxies such as journal name or impact factor. Number 5, stakeholders should commit to supporting the sustainability and diversity of the publishing ecosystem. The motivations behind this proposal are numerous. The group emphasizes inequities in dominant publishing models driven by high subscription paywalls or article processing charges. Furthermore, delays in the peer review and publishing process, in many cases lasting 12 months or more, feel unacceptable in the digital age. Additionally, current peer review processes, which are often confidential and lost if an article is rejected, are severely limiting. Finally, editorial gatekeeping can prevent authors from sharing their work. For anyone interested, this proposal is open to public comment until April. Now, despite the push towards greater OA publishing, there remain many who oppose it. Arguments against open access include the fact that OA publishing, as opposed to subscription-based publishing, simply shifts publication costs from libraries to authors, resulting in high article processing charges. Currently, it remains to be seen whether competition among authors for publication in more prestigious journals will drive up APCs, or whether competition among journals for high-quality research will reduce APCs. There are also concerns surrounding the incentive journals will have to publish more articles to increase their revenue. Another consideration is that high APCs of big-name journals will create greater inequity in the system, allowing only well-funded researchers and institutions the ability to publish in prestigious journals. The counter-argument is this inequity already exists in the subscription model, just from the reader perspective. The final concern is that publishers will have more power to drive up prices against individual authors as opposed to large libraries or institutions. However, given that authors retain their work's copyright in OA publishing, many believe authors will actually have more power than in the current model. At the root of all of these arguments is the price inelasticity of academic publishing. Simply put, authors and libraries have historically continued to pay APCs and subscription fees no matter how high the cost. This finding is supported by examination of journals that switched to having an APC and experienced no impact on the number of articles they published. The APCs for high-impact journals also reflect this fact. Currently, the cost of publishing an open access article in Nature is over $11,000, while publishing in top surgical journals like JAMA Surgery or Annals of Surgery costs around $5,000. While the cost for a journal to copy, edit, publish, and distribute an article varies significantly by journal, the high profit margins of almost all publishers would suggest that APCs and subscription prices outpace the cost of publishing. High APCs have not been implemented by publishers without resistance, however. In 2019, the entire editorial board of Elsevier-owned Journal of Informatics resigned and moved to MIT Press to start their own open access journal, citing Elsevier's unwillingness to negotiate lower APCs with the editors. Similar events have occurred at a number of journals, including the resignation of over 40 editors at Neuroimage just last year after Elsevier refused to reduce their $3,500 APC. Nevertheless, the demand to publish continues to exceed the supply of journals, and this publish or perish system in academia has become increasingly scrutinized. The primary goal of many academic researchers is to publish frequently and in the most prestigious journal possible. This motivation is driven largely by current academic career advancement pathways, which emphasize journal quality, promotion, and tenure, as well as grant funding decisions. Understanding this, some have begun to suggest alternative methods for assessing the quality of a researcher's work. The most commonly cited measure is the journal impact factor, the journal's number of citations of articles published over the previous 2 years divided by the number of articles published over the previous 2 years. Contrary to popular belief, there is very little evidence that journal impact factor correlates with article quality. For example, a 2011 analysis found that journals with a higher impact factor were more likely to have their article retracted. Nevertheless, journal impact factor, calculated and published by Clairvit Analytics, is frequently promoted by journals and used by both researchers and academic institutions to assess the quality of an author's work. However, the journal impact factor can be problematic. Given that it is an arithmetic mean, it can be distorted by a few highly cited papers. It can also be artificially increased by publishing editorials and letters to the editors, which serve to cite the journal's own articles, as well as by publishing more review articles, which tend to accrue more citations than original investigations. No one understood these problems better than the creator of the impact factor himself, Eugene Garfield, who compared his invention to nuclear energy when he said, "I expected it to be used constructively while recognizing that in the wrong hands it might be abused." Some journals have begun to acknowledge this, including Nature, who now reports an array of bibliometric data, including measures that are robust to outliers, such as the 2-year median citation rate. The pressure for authors to publish has also led to a darker side of academic publishing. Predatory journals, characterized by aggressive solicitation practices, misleading information, and a lack of transparency, are becoming more and more prevalent and have taken advantage of countless authors over recent years. One analysis identified about 300 potentially predatory journals that produced over 160,000 publications in just 3 years. Another problem has been the rise of paper mills, groups that will produce papers for authors in exchange for payment, frequently duplicating images or data in the process. No one has been better at identifying these fraudulent publications than Dr. Elizabeth Bick, a microbiologist who has dedicated her career to identifying tampered images in scientific research. Her work has found that approximately 4% of biomedical papers contain duplicated images, many of which are the products of paper mills. Thanks to her efforts, image screening of manuscripts has become increasingly utilized among journals, and there is hope that artificial intelligence will soon eliminate this problem. These issues highlight another component of the publishing process that requires attention: peer review. The inability of current peer review processes to reliably identify the products of paper mills underscores one of peer review's main challenges. The burden of reviewing relies on a limited pool of researchers who have less and less time to donate to reviewing. Willingness to review has become a major issue in recent years, described by many as the peer review crisis. The vast majority of editors say that finding reviewers and getting them to accept invitations is the hardest part of their job. This is backed up by data from 2017, which showed that editors had to send out 2.4 invitations to get just one review done, compared to 1.9 invitations just 4 years prior. Similarly, the burden of reviewing is not evenly distributed, with approximately 10% of reviewers performing 50% of all reviews. Traditionally, peer review has been without any financial compensation or reward. However, in recent years, many journals have begun publishing lists of their peer reviewers to provide some form of recognition. Additionally, the creation of websites like Publons allows reviewers to keep track of and even share their reviews publicly. These developments likely mark the beginning of a trend toward academic institutions and funding agencies placing more value on peer review. Besides realigning the incentive for researchers to perform peer reviews, many have also begun to reimagine the review process itself. Currently, there are many different types of peer review used by journals. Reviews can be single-blind, meaning reviewers know the author's identities, but the authors don't know the reviewers' identities. In double-blind peer review, neither authors nor reviewers know who each other are. However, reviewers can sometimes sign the reviews so that authors do know who they are. Some have advocated for a more collaborative review process, where reviewers, editors, and authors iteratively work as a group to make incremental improvements to the paper. More commonly, reviews are becoming portable, whereby if a paper is rejected from one journal, the review can be transferred to another journal so that the feedback is not lost. Some journals have also begun to publish peer reviews alongside the final article. Finally, in some settings, such as preprint servers, a manuscript is posted and the peer review process occurs publicly in an open forum. The issue of blinding in peer review has been contested for decades. One of the most illustrative randomized trials of single-blind versus double-blind peer reviews found that a manuscript authored by societal past presidents received higher ratings and was more likely to be accepted when reviewed as a single-blind manuscript as opposed to a double-blind manuscript. This type of reviewer bias has also been identified in other studies, including a review of abstracts submitted to the American Heart Association's annual meeting, which favored authors from prestigious institutions, the United States, and other English-speaking countries. The primary argument against double-blind peer review is the claim that reviewers are unable to adequately assess the integrity and quality of the work if they don't know who the authors are. Other efforts to eliminate the opaque nature of the peer review process include making reviews public. Some journals have begun making their peer reviews open and publishing them alongside the final manuscript. Proponents of this type of transparency stated it could help cut down on incidents like reviewers asking authors to cite the reviewers or journal's work in exchange for a positive review. This transparency in peer review appears to have no impact on review quality. A study of over 18,000 peer reviews in 5 journals over an 8-year period found that publishing peer reviews resulted in no difference in reviewer willingness to review, recommendations, or turnaround time. However, only about 8% of reviewers were willing to include their name on the published review. Like many systems, the COVID-19 pandemic put further stress on the peer review system as journals saw a huge influx of submissions. During the first wave of the pandemic, submissions to medical journals increased by 20 to 60%. However, given the pressure for rapid dissemination of research, decision times at medical journals were simultaneously cut in half. This was accomplished through fast tracking of relevant papers by removing many of the normal checks and balances during review. This fast tracking resulted in the rapid publication of COVID-19 papers, but also resulted in a number of retractions, including high-profile retractions in journals like the New England Journal of Medicine and the Lancet. One unanticipated development as a result of the pandemic was a significant increase in the use of preprint servers, which allow authors to post their unpublished manuscripts online, freely available for comment and review. In the example of the preprint server medRxiv.org, COVID-19 papers comprised almost the entirety of their rapid growth. Advocates of preprints say they allow for rapid dissemination of information without the barriers of peer review. Others, however, have concerns about the spread of misinformation through preprint servers. While only a fraction of these COVID-19 preprints went on to be published, the increase in preprint use has led many to rethink the traditional peer review process. One example of this type of rethinking is Review Commons, a review sharing collaboration between 27 different journals. It functions essentially like a preprint server with peer reviewers, giving authors the option after a review of their work to submit the refereed manuscript to one of the affiliate journals for submission, or take the refereed preprint to an unaffiliated journal for separate submission. Thousands of peer reviews have already been performed through this collaboration. Now, today we've touched on a number of challenges in the academic publishing industry, including the economics of the industry, open access, peer review. However, we haven't yet offered too many solutions. Now, I won't pretend to have the answers to any of these problems. There are a lot of much smarter people who have thought longer and harder about these issues than I have. However, I did gain a small amount of perspective when I served as an editor-in-chief for the nonprofit student-run open access journal that was started at my medical school, Wayne State University. That experience taught me many things, including how hard it can be to get colleagues to perform peer reviews. However, when we changed our school's policy so that medical students could earn academic credit by submitting articles and performing high-quality reviews, I learned the power of properly placed incentives. To no surprise, submissions and reviews greatly increased, and the journal is still very active today with almost 18,000 downloads in the past year. At the root of all of these problems we've discussed today are incentives. For example, most academic institutions and funding agencies do not provide any incentive to perform peer reviews. We do, however, place value on publication quantity and quality for career advancement. At most institutions, academic track promotion and tenure decisions rest heavily on the number of publications you've produced and the quality of the journals they were published in. This system isn't inherently bad, but it does rely on the publishing industry to measure our contributions to the field of science and allows commercial publishers to retain high profit margins in an environment of ever-dwindling funding. Some institutions, including UVA, have begun to recognize the trouble with these incentives. For example, just this year, the UVA School of Medicine changed the promotion and tenure process so that faculty CVs and research portfolios should no longer include a publication's journal impact factor. This change at UVA is directly in line with the recommendations of the Declaration on Research Assessment. DORA is one of many groups who hope to shift away from reliance on journal impact factor and instead toward other ways of assessing research quality. In their recommendations, DORA suggests promotion and tenure committees assess the scientific content of a paper instead of the journal within which it was published. They also advocate for assessing qualitative indicators of impact, such as influence on policy or clinical practice. UVA has also worked to limit the financial burden of its publishing agreements. In 2021, UVA, is a part of the Virginia Research Libraries Group, a consortium of university libraries in the state, reached a one-year deal with Elsevier that reduced the number of journal titles, but also drastically cut the cost to the library. By negotiating together, groups of libraries are able to achieve more bargaining power. UVA has come to similar agreements with other publishers as well, and the trend towards smaller, more tailored journal packages will likely continue. In addition to changes at the institutional level, some journals have also begun to change their publication models. A little over a year ago, the open access journal eLife announced that they would offer to publish every single paper they sent out for peer review. Authors would be the only ones with the power to withdraw their work. The peer reviews would also be published with the paper, with an associated editorial assessment of the work's significance. This change was met with an expected mix of applause and backlash, with critics noting concerns surrounding the potential for increased editorial gatekeeping with this change. Nevertheless, the shift away from the traditional model of peer review is worth careful attention. Change is occurring at the policy level as well. Thanks to the successful efforts of open access advocacy groups like the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition, or SPARC, an organization of 250 libraries and academic institutions across North America. In August of 2022, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy announced that beginning in 2026, all publications that result from federally funded research will have to be made immediately and freely available to the American public, effectively eliminating the 12-month embargo that is currently allowed. This is going to be a massive change to the ecosystem. In turns, it means by the time you are in the lab, your T32 funded research will have to be published by journals as open access. Now, it remains to be seen how this upcoming change will impact publishers, but many believe it will force all journals to have at least an open access option, though it is unclear who will pay for the associated article processing charges. There is some concern that publishers will begin to charge authors a fee to even submit their manuscript for review, particularly at prominent journals. Given this uncertainty, many libraries, including UVA, are currently hesitant to sign any publishing agreements that go beyond 2025. At the researcher level, there are a number of changes worth considering. When writing, citing primary literature instead of reviews gives credit to the original authors of the work. If seeking rapid feedback or dissemination of your findings, preprint servers can be a valuable outlet, and the vast majority of journals allow publication of manuscripts that have already been posted as a preprint. When choosing a journal, consider purely open access journals as opposed to hybrid journals, which effectively double dip in earnings when authors pay to make their work open access, but the publisher still earns subscription fees through their funded packages. If you're not able to publish open access, make every effort to deposit your work in a repository like PubMed Central. Finally, when assessing the quality of someone's work, don't rely on proxies like journal name or impact factor. Instead, take time, read the paper, and decide for yourself the significance of the work. These are all small steps that different stakeholders in the academic publishing industry are taking toward a more sustainable future, but progress has been slow. At the end of the day, an ideal future of academic publishing would have a few basic principles. First, authors should be able to share their work freely and openly when they think it is ready. Second, Peer review should consist of scientists publicly sharing their assessments of freely available papers. And finally, scientific works should be continuously reviewed throughout their lifespan by many different people. With this in mind, I'll offer several conclusions to this talk. Number one, academic publishing's traditional model still remains the dominant model to this day. Number two, open access publishing strives to make research freely and immediately available. Number three, although many of us are accustomed to closed single-blind peer review, many types of peer review exist with different benefits to each. And lastly, and probably most importantly, the landscape of academic publishing is rapidly changing, with funders, policymakers, publishers, university, and researchers playing an important role. I would like to thank the UVA library, especially Dan Wilson and Brandon Butler, for all of their help in my research for this talk. I would also encourage everyone to visit UVA Library's resources on open access publishing. One of the many things you will learn is that UVA is a national leader in this area, and we have transformative agreements with some publishers, such as Wiley, that will cover the cost of open access publishing in those journals. I'll finish up by just taking a moment to thank everyone here in this room today, who in some ways played an important role in my training over the past 7 years. There isn't enough time to thank each one of you individually, but know that your teaching and support has allowed me to grow tremendously. I'd also like to specifically thank each one of these guys in my class, without whom, quite simply, I don't think I would have made it here today. Not everyone is lucky enough to work alongside your best friends, and I haven't taken these past 7 years for granted. And finally, I'd like to thank my parents, my brother, and my fiancée, Sarah, for their nonstop support. There isn't enough thanks to repay the sacrifices you made for me along the way. Thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
First and foremost, these are my favorite grand rounds by far. I learned the most. I will fill out the evaluation and give you all stars and all that kind of stuff. But it does. It also feels on the day that we certify our rank list, which is today. It just reminds me of how important it is to pick the right people, and you're just another example of we picked the right person, many years ago. So it's just a total joy to see that maturation. Can you speak? I mean, first of all, it's a little daunting, all of this, because I think most of us are sitting here going, "What are we doing?" As we review these papers for free. But I want to focus a little bit, I hope, on a positive thing. You did the Reviewers Guild and for the DCR, and maybe you could tell people a little bit about what that experience was for you. You did an amazing job. I got to co-sign all of your reviews, and they were the best reviews I did in forever, but obviously you got credit for them. But can you talk a little bit about that and what that meant to you and that process?
Yeah, so Diseases of the Colon and Rectum has a Reviewers Guild program. I think it's just a few years old, but essentially it allows residents or junior faculty or people who just aren't that experienced with performing peer reviews to join the program under the mentorship of a more senior reviewer and perform, I think, a total of 5 reviews over the course of the year, where I would perform my review, I would send it to Dr. Friel, he would provide any feedback, and then it would actually be submitted to the journal as one of the actual peer reviews. And it was a great process for me. I think it helped get me started in performing peer reviews and sort of understanding all the thought and effort that needs to go into it. I also think that those types of programs are becoming more and more common among journals, and I think it's a great way to expand their reviewer pool and sort of address the peer review crisis.
Well, wonderful talk, and I'm really proud of everything you've accomplished so far, and I have no doubt that in the future you're going to be a wonderful surgeon and make us all proud. I think we're seeing more and more people submitting papers. There's more and more journals. you look on PubMed, the increase in publications every single year. You had mentioned that impact factor does not really play into quality of a paper, but can you expand on that? Because to me, I'm not sure I agree with that. If you look at, I publish a paper in Journal of Radiative Surgery versus, like JAMA Surgery or New England Journal, there is a difference in quality. That not only the novelty, the significance, the sort of the time spent on, coming up with the sort of the idea, and also the peer review process is very different. So what do you mean exactly that impact factor is not really associated with quality?
I agree with your point. I think that, certainly, probably on average, bigger name or higher impact journals tend to produce higher quality studies. But I do think that some of that is subjective. And I think a lot of times we've gotten away from reading articles that people have on their CV and instead maybe just looking at the names within which the work was published. And I think that does a little bit of a disservice to researchers. I think kind of one of the recommendations that I read about was maybe instead of just looking at names and impact factors would be to ask researchers, what they think their most high impact work is, or top 3 works, and then have them write a paragraph of, why they think they're the highest impact and what types of impact they've been able to make, whether that's on policy or practice.
I mean, your recommendation was to read more, right? But if you look at PubMed, you have you just type in something, you're getting hundreds of, articles. And I would say 90% of those articles probably not worth reading, or the quality is not sufficient to, get the answers that you need. So, like practically, how do we, do that? It's besides, reading more, which is it's becoming more and more difficult.
I agree. I'm not sure I have a great answer for that question. I agree. I mean, as I demonstrated, the number of articles and journals just continues to expand, and there continues to be more and more demand for that. And so how do you kind of sift through the noise? I think that's difficult. I think the point I guess I was trying to make was that I don't think journal impact factor is always a perfect measure of a journal's quality. And it can be skewed or inflated through certain measures. And just because a paper is published in a lower impact journal doesn't mean it can't have a really high impact on the field of medicine. Dr. Slingla?
Thank you. It's a great talk. Really interesting, compelling. Thank you. And I had not been aware, but I'm impressed that you did all that work at Wayne State with that journal there, and wonder what your thoughts are going forward in your career about how much you might want to be involved in leading journals, kind of leading the way in new directions, following on this.
I would love to. I think it's very interesting, obviously. There are certainly many problems, and I'd love to try to help address some of those issues that exist, and just try to make the system a little bit easier for everyone to manage. Because right now, I think it's very difficult and it's not equitable necessarily. So I think we have a lot of room for improvement. Dr. Bakker.
Excellent talk. Your thoughtfulness and attention to detail and maturity in this reflect the job you did in the lab for 2 years. Everything you did was with such integrity and such careful attention to detail, and just reflects so positively on you and how you care for patients and how you are in the operating room. So we're really proud of you and know you're going to be highly successful. So thank you.
Dr. Hedrick?
Just to echo, what Todd says, just a pleasure to work with you and, the best writer I have ever seen. Any article you wrote with me wrote way better than I would have. So congratulations to all that. And just such a novel choice of a topic here, and really just solidified all the things I've been thinking, along the way of how the impact factors can be manipulated. I just been involved in my highest cited paper, is a consensus conference publication, with no scientific value other than a review that they're doing every 5 years because it drives the impact factor of the anesthesia journal. But what about things like altimetric, which is another way to measure impact using social media? What did you come across with those types of things?
Yeah, I honestly didn't read too much about that. I think it's just another way of, assessing the impact and sort of, I guess, impact on the American public at large. I think those types of, any metric is susceptible to being abused or manipulated. And I think that one in particular probably could. If you have bots on Twitter that just start retweeting every post that belongs to you, I'm sure there's ways to manipulate that. So
let me help on that one. So first, I just want to say, seeing that you were talking about this, I excused myself from some other meetings because I really wanted to hear this. And I am amazed at the depth that you just covered this topic, given that you're not an editor and deep in the field. And I actually found what you presented to be pretty darn spot on. So I want to congratulate you on that. And you didn't just cover one or two big areas. You covered a ton of really big hot button topics that are going on in the publishing world right now. When it comes to the question about impact factors, so I actually think you have to look at everything. And so I do. I looked at citations. I look at altmetric for every article that's published. I look at citations. I look at altmetric, and I look at downloads. Okay, and so in many journals are going that direction. And I will tell you, because downloads is really important to me, because that's what everyone is wanting to download and read. They don't always correlate. So being a very data-driven person, I find it fascinating. What is cited, it does not always correlate with what the lay press and public picks up on with altmetric and with downloads. I can have stuff that is skyrocketing in the lay press, but has very little citations and vice versa. So it's fascinating, and I look at all. I do somewhat agree with Dr. Sung that yes, impact factors can be gamed to a certain extent, but in general, I think there is definitely directionality because, again, it's citations, and you're only going to cite work that you feel is practice changing and important. But yes, you are correct. It could be gamed. And listen, I am definitely aware of all of the techniques, and I'm a master of it. But yeah, the journal is where it is for a reason. What worries me the most is what you ended on. So I do think there's a lot of good with open access. There's a lot of challenges, and the peer review remains the critical part. Because for us to actually treat our patients based on something that was put on a preprint server that may not have gone through a rigorous peer review scares me. And that we could, be doing something to a patient based on that. So that has to have some regulation and oversight. The other thing that I very much worry about is pushing out with open access. And you nicely, thank you for putting the charge. I have nothing to do with that JAMA surgery fee. And just know I pay it too if I publish in the journal. So imagine your lab. You may put out 10 papers a year. And if you get to the open, where you're 100% open access, where are you going to come up with that $50,000? So it is pushing out the cost to all of us. Where is that $50,000 going to come from? So that greatly concerns me. I mean, I just had a conversation yesterday with one of the folks in my lab who wants to publish in an open access journal that has a high impact factor, but he has $3,000. And I'm like, So it's a problem. But Dr. Kane, wonderful, because you had great insight on covering all of these topics, and I really enjoyed sitting here listening to it.
thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, is there anything?
I want that last picture you had. Where did you get that? Is it on the
It
internet?
was on Google. Probably didn't cite the source.
Yeah, you got it. That's the one that I discovered. Like, seriously. I'm going, is that chief resident? I didn't have that insight into the publishing. So, good job. You really did a lot of research. Yeah, yeah, and I agree with him. I'm literally almost like, but knowledge and perspective.
Interesting is that it's really
Yeah. And I was nervous about you potentially being.
Why are you nervous?
I saw the topic. My other meeting.
The open access, you know, open access channel, that's the issue. Open access that we pay
It's
for.
challenging.
It's very challenging.
But don't think all the journals are double dipping because the revenue model has gone way down because of the subscription issue. So the open access is how they're staying, many of them are staying afloat.
Right.
Granted, Elsevier is a different beast.
Yes.
Yeah,
Unfortunately.
yeah. But I can tell you, looking at the AMA, the whole network of the AMA journals, because I see those budgets, they're about the same. As they've gone down in the subscriptions, they've gone up on the, you know.
And I agree with because how when he said
That's
traditionally, unfortunately, get a lot of economic factors. Because, not because you
Yeah, I'm glad you
care,
said that.
no.
I'd be being biased if I said that first.
No, but I was planning actually, and I'm like, okay, I'm not, but it is important. It's not because maybe I think that you have it in circulation or in JAMA, you're out, it's better part, the reality is the methodology.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very good.
Way
Oh,
more
yeah.
rigorous.
So the way to do it is.
All the stuff is in there. It's just a mess right now.
Same reviewers, the same methodology, so instead of me sending it to circulation, I send it to an open access channel. This is how the open access channel is.
It's so funny because I think we're gonna be unpacking grand rounds in August. So I'm actually, for other reasons, I'm getting a holistic talk on, you know, peek behind the curtain for publishing. Very different kind of talk than what you get. I'm giving that in August. It'll pair nicely with what you just did.
That was great job. And you
Yeah.
have to be involved in the editorial course, you know, I mean, it's like the more reviews you do,
Yeah.
actually editorial course.
Yeah, that's in my talk, all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. Yeah, yeah.
It's very important for you as a editor.
You saw the report card.
I
You're
know.
the most hawkish right now.
Because I think
Our residence corner we did
And that's
rectal.
Yeah,
because I
That's
saw
like my
that
third highest
sign
cited.
first, you know,
And
when
it's
we
like
were a little
really
bit high,
like
when we were high, and you're
nothing
right,
novel.
it has changed.
It's just
That's what I
pretty
can see.
cool.
We all know that. Like, can you deem it to something? Sure. You can deem it a little.
We drive.
And yeah, and he is right, a few papers that take off can have.
Yeah, right, but it's also because.
Everybody okay?
Yeah.
But hey, thanks for coming for the.
Of course, I saw him talking, I literally got out of my other talk.
First patient is Marshall. He is about to suspend an
Okay,
exam.
pass any gas or?
He has two.
I think.
No, he has 400 in his out of his NG, but it's pretty clear.
Okay.
I was looking at the X-rays from yesterday. Do you want another film just to
I
make
just
sure
get an
that?
X-ray and we can
Yeah.
decide.
Yeah.
I mean, I did, for him, I think most of it was like cold, you can see it was right cold. I just, if he
They're
aspirated,
trying to
that would.
publish and it's costing money and I just think about this stuff all
But
the
he's
time.
in good spirits. He's doing okay. I was
Yesterday
thinking,
was the first day where he wasn't, you know how he's normally nice and all we have.
Well,
Yesterday he
it's
stayed
built
out so
on-
well.
oh, really? No, he was looking good
Good.
this morning.
Anybody.
So,
So we can DC it, let's get the X-ray volunteer.
yeah, yeah. See if it's ready to go out.
You know, you don't really have a choice.
Next is,
And I think.
Custer.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like, she's just terrible from a home standpoint. I was gonna get home to see her. She really wants to go.
Let's, is she
But I-
getting worse or is it?
Um,
like,
her,
compared to-
so this is my first day back really from since Fridays, but, on Fridays, she was starting to get some oxygen requirement. I texted you about that, but her
Well,
wife,
yesterday was like one liter, but is it more? or-
yeah, she's still on 1 liter. I think her test,
Where did you do that work?
like,
Did you redo the analysis?
yeah.
Let's get Paul in. I don't want to rush her.
She passed her walking test with 1 liter, so she will need home oxygen. I just feel it's a little rushed if we send
Okay.
her, and then today is gonna be the first day where she's on PO antibiotics rather than
Okay,
IV.
why don't we wait one day and then tell her maybe tomorrow?
Yeah, okay, sounds good. All right, thank you.
Very good seeing you.
Thank you.
Do it like that.
Good, how are you? Yeah, I can come in. and-
9:30? Okay, let me talk when you go over.
Okay.
Again, never gonna have to redo them.
Yeah, yeah. I think we can just see some minutes here. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just do that.
Okay,
Like,
All right, nice job.
thank you.
Great job, Will. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I appreciate you coming.
It really turned out. I'm amazed by the breadth of the cover too. I mean, we talked about a little piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
4 weeks to show it.
I'm gonna
Yeah,
call
thank
Cardinal
you.
Hall
I
probably
appreciate your
tomorrow.
Important conversation.
Yeah, well, that's what, well, and you're good with paying it on your credit card and then we'll get you reimbursed.
Yeah, right.
If I'm going to fail.
I'm not sure I'm gonna reimburse.
Can I get a picture?
You want me to take it? You want him?
Right.
You're so corny, Dr.
Yeah,
Pearl.
like-
I love it.
Pretend that I had something to do with this.
For you guys.
Yeah, I
One,
mean, a realtor said like,
2, 3.
she said it would be crazy if we don't sell it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that, was really good.
Thank you. It's a little daunting, I saw Gene Kippy.
Okay.
They're like halfway through, I was like, oh gosh. I'm about to show.
Well, but you,
I know, when you live there for a long time, that's like, I'd been in the condo for like 7 years, and stuff had just accumulated. And
Go ahead and sign it. I'll notarize it.
Okay.
Can I leave my gloves on?
Yeah,
No, right, yeah.
Because I forgot my,
that's okay.
but I'm gonna be a CC.
Can I get your signature saying that I'm an ethical and moral doctor for the state of
But
Minnesota?
you're not.
I can't sign it.
You're not.
If a journal can charge you $5,000 to publish a manuscript, it seems I should get at least $100.
Sure.
Oh, me too for notarizing it.
Just like right there. And I'll look up your, actually like fill in your license and everything.
I totally forgot my stamp. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
What is it, today's